don't start by looking for properties. Find your ideal markets first. Then you can just go, well, yeah, I'm going to stay away from there and go pick another market and learn about that market. That's all part of the kind of the pre-market deal finding search that we go for.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Kenny Bedwell to the show. Kenny, thank you for joining us today. You are one of the leaders in the short-term rental space on analytics. And a lot of it is doing the work up front to make sure that you've done everything you need to do before you make the plunge.
In 2018, I bought my first short-term rental, and so I kind of scaled. And the problem was finding markets that I could afford as I scaled. At that time, there weren't any data providers that could just tell you the markets based on your criteria. That's what I really set to solve.
How do you think about amenities? Like, what are some of the highest ROI amenities that you can put in that you've seen?
It's not just about getting amenities. It's about how you market the amenity. Look at your guest avatar and what they like, and then nail that.
Welcome back to STR Like the Best. I'm your host, Michael Chang. It's my great pleasure to welcome Kenny Bedwell to the show. Kenny, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Michael. I'm excited to be here. Excited to chat.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to have you on the show. I'm really excited to have you on the show because you are one of the leaders in the short-term rental space on analytics, data. I'm a huge proponent of doing the work ahead of time so that you find yourself in a great market, you find yourself in a great property, you have those tailwinds at your back so that you really kind of set yourself up for success. And then a lot of it is doing the work up front to make sure that you've done everything you need to do before you make the plunge. So I'm really excited to talk about your journey, the company that you started. But why don't I give you a chance to introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So my name is Kenny Bedwell. I used to be a ex corporate analyst for Citibank. I was a data analyst and working that 9 to 5. And in 2018, I bought my first short-term rental, and so I've kind of scaled and pared back a little bit and scaled up over the years as I've leveled up my game. So I have 3 properties right now. One point, the height of my regime, I had 6 properties, 6 short-term rental properties, and I've downscaled to 3 due to cash flow goals and also just time restraints. But so anyway, that's kind of where I'm at today. But I really, I'm the CEO of STR Insights, and I also founded STR Insights. And the goal of STR Insights is to help people find profitable short-term rental deals. So right now, I'm very immersed into helping people find, whether it's through data or our consultation.
Perfect. And STR Insights is a title sponsor of STR Wealth, which is one of my favorite conferences to go to. And I think you did the keynote last year, and it was a great presentation. I really liked it. And I think you have a lot to share on. I think this is a part where a lot of people get hung up. Which market is this the right property? Whether it's for rental arbitrage, right, where you lease and then you lease long term, put it on Airbnb short term, or to buy a property. Like that's always kind of the first step. So I think this is a great conversation to have if you're listening right now and you're struggling to find a market. Like listen to Kenny. Kenny is really one of the experts here. And actually, you worked at Citi. I worked at Citi as well in my prior life before short-term rental. So we have that in common as well. But let's actually, before we go into STR Insights, let's talk about how you started, right? And because I'm guessing, when you first started, you kind of built a tool for yourself before you started a company to help others. So why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about that first property you bought in 2018. Where was it? How big was it? How much did you pay for it?
Yeah, so the first property I bought was actually a house hack. So I bought a property near where I live in Buffalo, New York, and I was going to these REI meetings, these meetups of long-term real estate investors, all these like really old men who were all about like, getting the apartment units and like number of doors and, this and this and like build up wealth and so on. And it was like, it was even in this like old crusty restaurant, and it was these meetups. It was like, I was like, man, is this really my fit? Like I wanted to get into real estate investing. And so anyway, I was like, I'm buying this property. I'm going to house hack it. And this one guy there, he had like some energy about him. And he's like, hey, I've been doing this like I've been doing Airbnbs, and I've used Airbnbs before at that time. And I was like, tell me more. And he's like, yeah, like I do it and I'm in this area, and man, you wouldn't believe how much money I make. I make like 3 times what I would normally make as a long-term rental. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. And so I already had this property we were living in. It was a duplex. The other side I was going to rent out long term. And I was like, what if we just, turn it into a short term rental in Airbnb and let's see what it does. And I convinced my wife, and we did. And sure enough, we started making a lot of money. And I was like, holy crap. And then so I used that money to go, and I actually did a couple rental arbitrage units at first. So I could, because I didn't have a lot of capital at that time to kind of scale. And then I was able to get my next property the following year and in downtown Buffalo. So I started getting a little bit further away. And then I got another one in Buffalo, and another one near Niagara Falls. I just started to kind of grow and scale up that because it really exploded until about COVID, and then set back, and then it exploded even further beyond that. So I've gone and gone and gone. But so I was using data and analytics, but I ran into a wall. Okay, because
sorry, can I pause you there for a second? So when you were when you were using it, what were you using then? Because STR Insights wasn't born then. Like what was your tool at that time?
What was my tool? Obviously, like the basics. I'd say AirDNA,
okay,
and data revenue. So
okay.
I did dabble with Mashvisor. When I go to make a purchase and you're risking thousands of dollars, there are no signs. I like this guy. It's like I use them all, right? Like even today, I'm like I'm gonna go verify. I'm gonna make sure. Like I'm always like, what's the validity of the data set? Because there's risk there, and how do we mitigate risk? We do it through knowledge, right? So the more data we can have, the better. So, but long story short, I was using different platforms to verify and finding sweet spots in the markets. But the sweet spots weren't the problem. The problem was finding markets that I could afford as I scaled. Because I knew that, number one, especially coming from a finance background, I need to diversify, meaning I need to be in other markets that aren't impacted like the same seasonality as what I was dealing with. And then the second thing, though, and the most important one was, great, like, sure, I need to be in more markets, but where? What's going to fit my budget that I can afford and also have good returns? Because I only know what I know. I'm limited. And so what I found is that at that time, there weren't any data providers that could just tell you the markets based on your criteria. You had to know the market, and I was joining these like short-term real estate groups. Everyone's in the Smokies and Emerald Coast and Orlando. And then on the West Coast, like Tahoe, like some of these really Coachella, like all these popular Joshua Tree, all these really, really popular areas. I'm like, I can't afford that. I couldn't at the time afford 600,000 or above. It was like 300 to 400. Where the heck am I going to go that, is going to work for me and make sense? And so I really set out on this journey of trying to answer that question, because it's not just about the revenue. It's about the purchase price as well to get an ROI, return on investment. And so that's what I really set to solve. And through what I was doing at Citi, I realized that I had the skills required to get the right data and to go after the right sources to do that. And that's what I did. I went and compiled it together. I had all these like crazy spreadsheets, and I took revenue data and I took this other data from, housing price data that I had acquired from another source, merged it together, and was able to go, wow, here are the top markets in the country based off of my budget. And then I went and bought a property there.
Okay, so got it. So maybe without giving too many secrets, when you looked at that, so was it more of a kind of a purchase? And that's kind of what I use. Is my first screen is a purchase price to gross revenue ratio, right? I look at if a house costs $1 million and it can only do 100,000 of gross revenue, then that's 10 times. Like that's always like my initial screen of how I look at it. If it's 10 times for me, it's like, okay, that's probably too expensive. If it's 4 times, that's great. Is that was that the way that you looked at it, or was it a different kind of screen?
Yeah, and that's actually still how I look at it. It's called gross ROI, right? The gross yearly revenue divided by the purchase price of the property gives you a percentage. So everybody's gross ROI is different, though. And I've actually worked a way to be able to determine, based on your cash flow goals or your cash on cash goals, what your gross ROI target is. So some people it's like 15%, some people it's 17% or 20% or 25%. It just depends on the person and what they're looking to obtain. But once you know that number, what I have found through experience is that number, it's easier to evaluate deals, like you just said. Okay. Because if the gross revenue doesn't make sense, then you don't need to go figure out expenses. You don't need to go talk to a lender and say, can I afford this property or what are my monthly payments going to be? Because it doesn't make sense with a gross
Yeah,
revenue.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a screen, right? And it's like just a quick and dirty. I just give my background. I flip it around. I don't look at I look at multiples versus percentages, but it's basically the same thing. You just kind of flip it.
Yeah.
I like the whole number. I like the whole numbers instead. But look, I mean, I think for folks out there, like that is, and I'm glad like Kenny and I aligned on this. Like that is the first thing is your purchase price and your gross revenue, right? And then obviously purchase price is easy, right? You know kind of what you can afford and spend, and then the gross revenue, like that part is always like the most difficult part. And let's come back to that. But I want to kind of dig in just a little before we kind of go into the data side. I want to dig in a little bit to your portfolio. Now you had six, right? And now you're at three. Um, Maybe talk about that, right? Like how'd you get to six? And then what were the drivers for you to par that back to, kind of where you are today? Because like, at least for me, I really think about I really want to hold the we spend a lot of time finding these properties and making them nice and kind of doing what we need to do. I really try not to sell them. My thought process is like I'm going to pass these on to my kids when I'm not here, and they get for folks that are in the U.S. and understand taxes, when you die, your basis steps up to fair market value. So the value when you go, and your the people that your beneficiaries, your kids, don't have to pay the tax between what you bought it for and the current price. So that's always my mindset. So I really try not to sell. I'm never thinking about selling. But maybe talk about that a little bit. Like, what was your? Because you're doing it differently. So I'm personally curious. Like, what was your thought process for that?
Yeah. So number one, my time is limited. And also as I value my time more and more as I grow and in terms of wealth and just experience and things, I know that my time is valuable. And so when I have a property, even though the ROI on it, for example, the first property I house hacked, okay? I'll give you two different examples, two different reasons. But the first property I house hacked, over time, I was renting out one unit, then I could rent out both units. But over time, the revenue, especially after COVID, started to dip with increasing competition and other factors coming to the market. It started to dip and it didn't make any sense from being a short-term perspective. And so I actually still have that property and it's a long-term rental now. I flipped it to a
Okay.
long-term rental. Am I making as much as a long-term rental? No, not quite, but the risk reward is significantly like greater than what it was before the short-term rental. So the short-term rental is making 3x. Now it would probably make 1.5 times as much as a long-term rental. It's not worth it to me to short-term rental. I could just be completely passive and not involved in it and it run itself. And I'm totally fine with that. So time value is really important. And then on top of that too, cash flow. So another property I had in Buffalo, I bought for 250. Really, really great property. I mean, really, really good returns. The cash flow though was only like $15,000 to $20,000. Still, and sorry, I know you live on the other side of the state where it's properties are a little bit higher. We're talking like a 200,000 or 250 per, like a lot less purchase price budgets here, like a lot lower. So, but the cash flow as I grow and scale, I've still got the same problems. I still have to put the same time into that property as I do my bigger properties that are making more money. And I'm like, what the heck is my return on equity? So meaning like, if I sell this property, we sold it for 400. Okay. So I take my cash flow and I divide that by the equity into the property, the 150. And if it's 20% or less, I'm going to sell that property and take that equity and roll it into a bigger project to scale. And that's what I've done. So I'm scaling, I'm putting it into bigger properties that cash flow and make more money. So
let me pause you there for a moment. I mean, and that's great. I want to unpack that a little bit for folks that maybe just aren't as like, don't live this day to day like you and I do. I think what Kenny's talking about is people have different terms for it, but doing like an equity audit, right? Because as your properties increase in value, if you say you bought it for 250, now it's 400, you had a mortgage on there, now your equity, maybe you had 25 or 50 in there, depending on how much you put in. Now that 50 of equity is 200, right? If it's, say it's 400, right? So your equity value has increased significantly. If your cash flow is still the same, if it's kind of a denominator effect, right? Like the denominator is a lot higher, so your percentage is going to be lower, right? Because you have a lot more equity in there. And I'm just curious here, like, at least how I think about it is like I've already done the hard work up front to kind of market it. And although it's 20K, I've kind of done the work already versus like kind of breaking that apart and then re-putting it into a different property. Is it more of like, and I want to talk about the property that you probably tendered your one into or sold into, but do you think like just kind of keeping it running like that amount of time is, I guess, how do you quantify that? Like, since it's already there, you have your cleaners and everything's kind of already working already versus pulling that all out again. And then, say you make more, but why not just raise capital or do something else where you keep that in place and then just kind of get into something else, but have that work, that sunk costs kind of continue to run for you. How do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. So once again, for me, this is for me personally. So everyone listening, like everybody's in different. I think that's really important to know. It's like everybody's got different circumstances, and so for me, young family. We talked about this earlier, Michael. I've got a 1 year old and a 3 year old. Like, time is really, really valuable. You know, and so that the one property that's making me 20 grand, I still have to exert an amount of effort and time into it. And I'm like, really looking at it going, man, I'm starting to really hate this thing. And we're in a
Okay.
hospitality business. We can't hate what we do, or that starts to show. And so the quicker I am able to pick that up and pivot or adjust, the better the results are going to be for me. And so I said to myself, well, look, can I take that equity and find a market and find a property that can generate $50,000 in cash flow? Because that 30K delta is going to be more valuable to me and be well worth my time. Maybe it's in a better location where my family can go and visit. We can have like that, use an economic term. I've never used it for a while. So I don't know why this came to my head, but I called it UTILS, utility, positive utility of time, of happiness, not just from that property making money, but we can also go somewhere we can visit and enjoy. And we call that UTILS. That came into my head, but it did. Anyway, so that positive utility. But long story short, I found a property and it cash flows a little over $50,000 a year from the equity of that one that was doing 20. So for me, it was worth the 30K difference, and also the time, and also the place that my family can go and visit. We hold family reunions there too. Now it's a bigger property, it's like a win-win, but I had to like sacrifice some of the other stuff, the ones that were already going, like you said. So
Yeah. No, just like you said, before we hopped on the pod, you have a 3 and 1 year old. I have a 2 and I'm like 6 months behind. You have a 2.5 and a 7-month old. So yeah, like I mean, I highly cognizant of that. Like they're only this young once, and like if you miss it, you miss it. And I
yeah,
definitely, and I think we're very aligned on that. Like I don't want to miss it. So, and I do think as you kind of become a more experienced investor, and obviously you had to be successful, right? Just kind of the more successful you are, the more experienced you are because you kind of keep doing it. You really start valuing that time is the constraint versus the capital. And then I'm sure kind of starting STR Insights, which we'll hit on next, probably has a part to play in it. Starting a business is a fair amount of work. But maybe let's talk about like just you have 3 properties now. Maybe talk about like your best one or the one that you want to talk about. Like, what does that look like now? Like, where'd you buy it? What was the gross revenue? Were you able to increase the gross revenue? Based on your experience now working in short, having been a host now for 6 years.
yeah.
Because I want to hit on the operator quality, right? Because I think that gets lost in just looking at numbers. Like what I will do with a property is very different from what you'll do, right? Whether it's better or worse, because like the operator quality is very important. So let's start off with like like how much was it? What was the gross revenue? And were you able to kind of increase that materially with your under your stewardship?
So we'll do the one that's got a little more got some history so I can like tell the transitions over time. So this one I bought in the end, or like right at the beginning of the summer. So like 2 years ago, exactly, a little over 2 years ago of 2022. So I bought this property for $350,000, 5 bedroom, 5 bath, Lake Market, Watkins Glen, New York, not terribly far from you. In the first year, I did 75, something around there. I'll have to pull up the numbers, but in the 70s, I think. And I was like, I didn't do what I was hoping I would do. I thought I was going to do a lot more than that. And, there was starting to be a little bit of pullback and things, and two, that was during a time when a lot of people, we were using 2021 numbers for a lot of stuff, right?
Yep.
So as the market was shifting, but I still looked at it from a sense of like, I was like, no, I know I can do better because I literally got 0 bookings from like January to April. It's a lake market. It's New York. It's freezing cold. I was like not surprised by that, and I didn't lose money. I was still making money on this property, like to $350,000, 70K or 75K. Like that's still really freaking good. But I was
Yeah,
like, no,
5x, great.
I think this property can do a lot more. And so, one of the things I look at when I go into a market is barrier of entry, because going back to what you said, Michael, operations is really important. And something that people need to kind of recognize within themselves is like, how good of an effort are you going to put into being an operator? It's really important. But at the same time, like, not everybody's going to be the best operator. So you either need to partner with a good operator, or you need to like make up with that with automations and systems that can kind of support your whatever your deficiencies are. And so for me, I personally, and I don't know how long I'm going to do this. I personally, I'm not a huge fan of operating. Like when guests call me, I'm like, like what failed? Like why? Like who did this to me? Like I'm going to call the maintenance guy. I'm like, hold on, fix that. Like it's just like it grinds my gears. And so as I'm starting to like expand, I'm partnering with people now who are doing that because I'm good on the numbers side and they're better on the operations. But anyway, this property that I have though, so I realized like I need to up my game in my market, but what can I do? And so I studied my market and I looked at what I called the barrier of entry, meaning like what's the basic level of competition and what do they not have that can separate me from everybody else? Turned out to be amenities. And so I literally, and I know this sounds super silly, but this is the market I'm in. I added a hot tub. Nobody else had a hot tub. It's like, all right. And I remember like asking some people there, like, because I just wanted to get like a sense of, I mean, there's no data because nobody has it. And I personally know hot tubs just do real well everywhere. And I'm like, let's see what this does in the wintertime. Do people actually, are they going to come and stay at my place in the wintertime now that I have a hot tub? And so anyway, so 2023, I've got the hot tub now. And in the last year, I've made $108,000 on that property. So I added a hot tub and a few little extra things, but yeah, it's mainly the hot tub. It's that those winter bookings, that extra like 20, 30K that I didn't get before came in the wintertime, and that supplements and propels in the future. So it's being able to like recognize those things. But I will say this, in order to do that, and a lot of people are like, well, that's easy for you to say because you're in a market where people didn't have hot tubs, but it starts there. Choose markets where the barrier of entry is low. So you don't have to like be a super genius in order to like outsmart everybody there.
Man.
So anyway.
No, it's funny you say that. And, like for folks like that 30K might not sound as much, but this business model, this is a very high fixed cost business model. What I mean by that is your variable cost really is your cleaning. There's some utilities in there, of course. The more people are in there, the more they're going to turn on electricity and whatnot. But it really is governed by your mortgage payment, if you have one, right? Like your mortgage payment, your taxes, your insurance, right? Those are the big things. And once you kind of pass that threshold, you will have the variable cost of cleaning, but it's almost like then your profit goes from like 20% marginal profit to like 80%. It's huge. And that 30K that you're talking about there, like I would presume that is 80% margin business there, which is like, 25K of cash flow versus like the
Yep.
75, which is, I'm going to guess is a lot lower than 80%. So, those little things make a big difference. And a hot tub is, you might have had to put a pad or upgrade to electrical, whatever it is, but 10, 12K probably max, probably not more than that. You pay that back in one season and you have that now for, I don't know, the useful life of that hot tub, which is like 5-7 years. It's like an amazing ROI, which so kudos to you on that. And I'll share a funny anecdote. So last night, so we're in contract for this property in upstate New York, or what I term upstate New York, and I'll be kind of broader. I know, people in Buffalo don't term where
So for
don't
us,
term
yeah,
where I'm at. You're
we
upstate
got
New
five
York.
parts of New York.
Everything north of 96th Street is upstate New York to me.
There you
But
go.
I was looking at a competitor listing, same bedroom count, better location than one I'm at, but like far fewer amenities, which I'm banking on as well. But this person only on Verbo, like 47 reviews, all 5-star reviews, all great, right? Pricing pretty decent. I looked at the listing. It literally is someone's like janky iPhone. I don't even think it's an iPhone, like just a janky photo that literally someone just went, put it up there. No amenities, no design, nothing. So that gives me confidence that, like, hey man, if this person is doing these kind of numbers and this is the quality they're listing, yes, you have a better location, 5 minutes better than me. But like, if I have real design, real photos, real ops, real amenities, like I think I can do just as well, if not better. Like, like, so for folks out there, like there's a qualitative and quantitative aspect, and we're going to hit on a quantitative now. But just because something says it does 75K doesn't mean that you will do 75K. You might do worse, but if you really put the time into it and the research, like you probably can do better. Like, hiring a professional photographer isn't that, it's $600. It's not that much money. But if your competition is taking photos on their phone and uploading it with no filter, nothing, weird angles, like that's a market that's a market that I'm excited about. I'm not excited to go down to Orlando and competing with those completely, themed Airbnbs that have like a lazy river and like all this crazy stuff. Like that is not my cup of tea. If I could put in a hot tub and get 30K, like that's where I want to be. Because like fundamentally, I think people kind of forget this a little bit too. There's no extra points on playing this game on hard mode. And like what I mean by that is like going to hard markets and like doing really well, that's great. But it's a lot of time and capital, right? Money. If you do the work up front and find a market that can do just as well, and maybe the level of competition is less, like you're gonna work fewer hours, have less stress, and make just as much, if not more money. Like, why not do that? Like, and that's why that for me, I've been using AirDNA for a long time now. I also subscribe to a couple other different data platforms just to kind of triangulate. Just to your point, like you're never going to be perfect on your analysis. You're always going to be off, right? And so if you have the more data points you have, you kind of triangulate where you might be, and then if you can even hit the low end of that and still do well, like that's a worthwhile bet, at least in my book. But I want to talk. Let's talk about the quantitative part of this. Please talk about STR Insights, like how it's a great product. I poked around with it. Tell us like what is the use case? Like what is the perfect customer for STR Insights?
Yeah. So the perfect I think like the differentiator between us and kind of really everybody else is it is a market finding tool. So it's got all the revenue and it's got the calculators, it has amenity stuff, all that fun stuff. And maybe some little features are better than other. We even have like AI capability. That's cool. But like the core thing that separates it is for people who are trying to answer that first question with getting started or even their second, third, fourth, fifth property. Where can I invest today based on my personal preferences? Budget, ROI goals, destination type preferences like best beach markets, best mountain markets, best mountain markets for under 500,000. I mean, you can get crazy specific with it and, isolate. Everybody's got these like weird preferences. And it's not just about, where are the best places to invest that are beaches? It's like, well, I don't want to be in Texas. I want to be in Florida. Or, then that changes to only Florida. So the tool allows you to filter those things down and really get and figure out where are the best markets based off of revenue and purchase price of short-term rentals, keyword. not median listing price. Because median listing price represents residential real estate, not short term rentals. Now, certain markets, short term rentals are pretty much residential real estate, but in popular vacation markets, they're priced differently. And so, especially like beach markets is a really good example of this. We know that, yeah, on the beach is going to be so much more than off in a neighborhood, a mile away. But the median listing price is a median listing price of that whole market, not just the differences. And so we spent a whole year trying to target and get the properties. We pulled short-term rentals. Here's how we do it. We pulled short-term rental properties, pulled their addresses, and then use that as our values. So our valuations based off of actual short-term rentals compared to their revenue. And that gives us a gross ROI. And that tells us, hey, this market's really, really good. So
do you factor? So that's great. And I'm going to not test you, but I'm going to ask you for some more specifics. But one thing that I personally, there's always the popular markets out there, right? You talk about, like, you reference Florida, you reference Texas, and the way that I think the nuance that some people, or at least it took me a while to understand, is like revenue is revenue. Obviously, what we all really care about is how much profit. And like Texas, for example, like there's these nuances that are really important. Texas, for example, your property tax gets reassessed every single year, and it's very high. It's like 1+%. So like that really can start getting away from you. Beach markets, Florida, the insurance is crazy down there, right? Like from the property insurance from 2022 to 2023, 2024, like there's some real material changes, and the availability of insurance is very can vary. Maybe that's the right way of saying it.
yeah,
So how do you think about, and maybe it's not, maybe it's more on the qualitative side, but how do you think about that in market selection? Because that for me is a very big one, right? Like Smokies, for example, very low, or used to be very low property taxes. They've increased that now. But very low insurance rates, right? And you get reassessed every 5 years versus like Texas, where it's like every single year, where Florida, like your PITI can double at renewal if you can even get it. Like how do you personally think about that?
how do I personally think about that? So, number one, I think it's really important going back to your multiplier concept, right? Or what I call the gross ROI, meaning like, so the gross ROI and the multiplier. So let's say it's, 5x, right? So 20%. So if 20% of the purchase price is your gross revenue, okay, I know in most markets, even the Floridas and the Texas, that property is still going to be pretty decent of a deal, 20%. Okay. If I know that, then, and I'm looking for properties in those markets and I see some 20% ones, they're probably going to pencil out, even with all these like random expenses being choked in there. Now, sure, they're not going to be as good as maybe something that's 20% in the Smokies, like you're saying. However, 20%, like, I'm throwing 20% out there because that's a kind of a common one I hear, but it varies person to person. So that's like number one. Okay. So using the gross revenue needing to hit certain targets. And if you don't find any properties in that market that are hitting that goal or whatever you set, the gross ROI, that multiplier, there's a sign that that's probably not a good market for you. So go look somewhere else. Number
Yeah, makes
two,
sense. I like it.
a lot of what you're saying is like figuring out so after you've chosen some markets, diving into those markets and figuring out, okay, well, what does it cost to, have insurance? So what I personally recommend with deal finding, if we want to move to that, is don't start by looking for properties. Find your ideal markets first. Answer the questions that you're talking about first, and then start looking for properties. Because once you run into these things, because yeah, the insurance rate's crazy. I mean, I've seen triple in Florida. Some of these properties tripled, and
It's
I'm like
nuts.
year over year tripled for their insurance rates. It's crazy. So like, how do you like you can't avoid that, but if you can catch it and like see that and study the market first and learn about these things, then you can just go, well, yeah, that obviously I don't want to go there. I'm going to stay away from there and go pick another market and learn about that market. Another side of this too is regulation. Like you need to see the community sentiment. That's all part of the kind of the pre-market deal finding search that we go for. So
Yeah, no, that I love that approach, and I think that's the right way. And similar to the way that we think about the world too. It's and maybe just to paraphrase, my understanding of it, it's the lower the multiple. The way that I look at the world, the lower purchase price you pay per gross revenue dollar, right? So if something's doing $100,000, if you can pay $300,000 for that house versus $1 million for that house, right? There's enough margin there that will allow you to absorb, whether it's high property taxes or high insurance or both, right? High operating costs, high capex, whatever it is. The more buffer you have, the more likely that property will be able to pencil out for you. So it's a great way to do kind of that initial screen, because if something's like you're paying 10 times for something, it almost doesn't really matter because it's unlikely to pencil. Um, One thing that I've personally noticed is the lower the multiple. Right, actually, let's just pick one. I'll use your terminology, so we can just, instead of switching back and forth, the higher cash on cash return in a market, at least what I've seen, is like usually that's the lower purchase price. Like those properties are generally like slightly cheaper, and the gross revenue is generally slightly lower, right? So like if you buy a $3 million house, it might do 300K for you. It's 10 times, but you might still be to make enough dollar margin there versus a property that's 300K, right? You're paying, and say you get it, it's 50K of revenue, but your dollar margin is going to be a lot lower there, just given the gross revenue is just a lot lower there. Is that something that you see as well? Like, how do you think about that for you and for your clients?
Yes. So here's my rule of thumb, and this is just kind of, once again, this is a made up rule. It's not really backed by anything
The
super
bedroll rule.
quantitative.
It's a bedroll rule.
The bedroll rule, right? So there's cash on cash return and there's cash flow. Okay. And the two are actually inverse of each other, meaning like the less money you put into the deal, the higher the cash on cash return, but more likely the more debt you take on. Therefore, because you have a higher monthly payment now, your cash flow goes down. So scaling and getting started, cash on cash and snowballing is really, really important. And so your focus should be on maximizing your cash on cash return as much as possible. However, when you hit, and here's the Bedwell rule, $500,000 of purchase price or higher, you really should be more focused on the cash flow of the property, meaning how much profit does it make at the end of the year? Because if the profit isn't there, it doesn't matter what the cash on cash return is. It will follow it, but like it doesn't matter because it's not worth your time. So when we can afford bigger properties or more expensive properties, essentially, the cash flow becomes more important and leads the goal. So what I tell my clients is, look, don't worry about cash on cash. Figure out what your cash flow goal target is. How much do you want this property to be generating? 50,000, 40, 30, 35, whatever. And I say a minimum happiness score. That the wrong answer, people say this all the time, is, well, Kenny, I want it to make as much money as possible. We all want our properties to make as much money as possible. That's not a goal. Okay. What's your minimum happiness
It's a
score? It's a
dream.
little subjective, right?
Yeah.
But like, what do you want this thing to make at minimum? Anything less than that, you're disappointed. More than that, that's the cherry on top. So what's your minimum happiness score? And then we work backwards from there. And that calculates gross ROI. And then we know, okay, great. This is what and where we should be looking to get these numbers.
So Kenny, the property I'm in contract with is around $1 million. What cash flow target should I be? What's the happiness score there? Like what's the minimum cash flow I should be generating from that? And what Kenny and I haven't pre-wired this question, so I'm actually curious what your answer here is.
Here's how I approach this. People ask me that all the time. Well, Kenny, what do you think? What do you see in the market? And I'm like, I see a lot of different things in the market. It doesn't matter. It's what you want. What is it worth it to you? So let me ask, there's two ways to calculating this. Okay. The first way, the most uncommon way, is time money value. Okay. So I have figured out that over the span of every single month, on average, we're doing some back of the napkin math here, on average, you'll spend about 8 hours per month per property managing it. Okay. So that's dealing with guests and doing all kinds of stuff, getting it ready. Like if you just take the average for the year, and I've interviewed a lot of people and compiled this data, just trust me at this point. So that's 96 hours a year you'll spend per property, okay, on as a short-term rental. Well, if your hourly rate at your job, let's say, is $500 an hour, there's some people making that much money. Okay, well, you take $500, you multiply it by 96, that's 48K. Well, so if the property doesn't generate 48K or more in cash flow, it's not worth that person's time, because technically they could just go work more hours. Their time is valuable in other places. Sure, there's tax savings, appreciation, but we don't invest simply for those. We invest for the cash flow. Well, we should be, at least. So the reality, so that's one way of doing it. But the second way, though, most people like myself are going to fall in the second bucket of minimum happiness. So when someone says, I'm going to buy $1 million property, how much should it cash flow? I'm like, well, what do you feel comfortable with it cash flowing that you would be excited about? But anything less than that, you'd be disappointed at. So,
Fair
Michael,
enough.
what's your
Okay.
thoughts on
That
that? What would you say though? You tell us. Like,
oh, well, I mean, so for me, I don't spend 8 hours a month on. I mean, like personally, for me,
well,
like we
you've got
have,
it automated. You've got
yeah,
it
we have.
automated. But
It's been 6
take
years,
into
right?
account
Yeah,
setup and like, it's kind of like an average, but sure.
totally. No, no, like just and I'll just talk to my process because people always ask you like, what do we do? We have 32 short-term rentals, right? 6 we own, 26 we rent or arbitrage, right? So they are properties that we rent and then re-rent. They earn good return for us, right? Like we don't have the appreciation benefits obviously because we don't own them, but they'll do 30+% cash margins, right? So which means that for every $1,000 that comes in, we'll keep 300, ballpark 300 of that, right? And that's for us is fully loaded. So that is, and we teach us in our mastermind in our group like all the systems that we've incorporated. We have a full offshore team that handles all the guest communications, all the maintenance stuff. We have, all the automation, all the software automations that you can think of that try to, block us from those calls the 2 a.m. calls. I used to get those all the time and I hated those. And I swear to God, like one time at a dinner with friends, like I got pulled out again because the hot tub wasn't working, and I had to be on the phone and figure out. And I was like, "This is never happening again. I'm not dealing with this again." And then but so there is a way to like kind of build processes to protect yourself from that. The way that we think about it now is you're right on the time, right? And what we've tried to do now is find properties where we fully load everything in there. So all the setup and everything, we will hire other people to do. Like we will really try not to be there unless we absolutely have to be. We'll try to just be there at the beginning and the end. So for our threshold is 20%. Like we want to get 20% of our money, cash on cash on every single property. We'll put 20 down on every single property too. So, this isn't like a 5% kind of thing. We'll put real capital in, and this is fully loaded again. So this is every single all the capex we put into the property to make it better, like that goes into the basis. And if we should be generating a 20+% return on that. What we do, and you hit on taxes, and I do want to hit on that quickly. There is bonus depreciation. We all know about it, the STR like loophole, bonus depreciation, all that fun stuff. Never let, and I assume you agree with this too. Like, never let the tax tail wag the dog. Like, the property on its own should do whatever return metric you have, right? And the taxes for us is just icing on the cake because it's a one-time deal, right? Like, we get the benefit that 1 year, we save some taxes, we defer those taxes, excuse me, and then, but we never rely on that to make the numbers work. It has to work without the taxes, right? I think a lot of people, they're maybe a little below their threshold, and then they like added taxes. Okay, well this works, and I don't want to. Once I pay the money to the government, never get it back. Like, I personally don't subscribe to that. Maybe some people do. There's no right or wrong answer, but I don't. So we really look at it from like that property. Like, it should do at least 50K plus a year in cash flow for us, right? And we'll save some money for taxes. Like, that's the way that we've looked at this. And also, I think also as you graduate, you kind of level up in your short-term rental game. The appreciation matters too, right? Like, we don't put that into numbers, but like obviously a nicer property in a good area, it's going to cost more money. But we think that there's a limited supply of that. To your point, in the barriers to entry, there's only so many of those kind of properties in this market, so that hopefully more people like the market want to get in, and then the prices go up too. So we look at there's a number of different factors that I feel like I'm kind of just like jumbling different concepts in there, but like there's a number of different things that we look at in order to find something that works, and which is why it's taken us like 22 months since the last purchase to buy something. Probably had I met you earlier, I probably could have cut that down a little bit, but hope maybe for the next one, I'll be able to leverage your this podcast and your thoughts and finding the better next one. But that's how we look at the world. I think that's why I like arbitrage in the beginning. Something that's kind of what you did in the beginning too. I like arbitrage in the beginning, not just the cash flow, but also because you learn the business processes. right? It's hard to build processes for one property, right? But if we have 10, it's a lot easier to hire an assistant, to buy the software, to spend the time to optimize that software. It's really hard for one, but if you have like 10, you can spread that out over those 10 properties, and it makes, more sense for that to get the ROI back on time.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, if you look at if you look at property management companies, who have over 50 properties or more, their average spend per property per month for technology and automation stuff is going to float between 50 to $60 a month.
Oh, good. Perfect. Nice.
The average host is somewhere between like 100 to 130 a month, for all the little different things. If you have like 5 or less properties, and you're doing dynamic pricing and the property management software and the Ring doorbells and this, I mean, it adds up. And some people are like, okay, you got to start doing the math, but yeah, it does really add up. And so that's kind of what we've seen on average. But you're right. So as the more properties you take on, the more you automate and systematize, it actually gets cheaper to operate.
It gets cheaper,
So
100%. No,
yeah,
that's and I'm glad I didn't know that metric. We're right in the middle of fairway on that one. So I'm glad to hear we're not overspending on software. I track all that stuff closely because I think it's another thing too. If you're listening to this, like, it's really important to get your numbers right. Like, you get your numbers right in the beginning, like, the market, the cash on cash return, but also once you start operating it too, like, really, this is where, like, getting on QuickBooks and like having like real bookkeeping, making sure that you capture all the money, all the expenses that you're taking on. I used to do it in spreadsheets, and once I went to QuickBooks, I was like, oh, I missed all of this. Okay, cool. Like, I need to now really focus on optimizing my stack so that I'm not overspending on stuff. So again, just kind of goes back to the point, like, just do the work up front. Um, you'll be in a much better place in your short-term rental business. We, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I do realize we're running kind of over on time. Before, like, I want to ask you, there are a couple questions I wanted to ask you. So just for some of the more experienced hosts on here, and this is where in our prior conversation was really helpful for me. So I want to kind of share this. Um, if you have a property and it's not doing super great, and we're on STR Insights, we're on AirDNA, like, how can you figure out like where you put, and you want to say spend another 10, 15,000 to upgrade your property? Like, what are some, and we talked a little bit about amenities. Like, how do you think about amenities? Like, what are some of the highest ROI amenities that you could put in that you've seen? Or is it all market dependent?
So to answer your question, though, a lot of times it is market dependent, but there are generic amenities that just do really well. It's not just about getting amenities; it's about how you market the amenity. So adding an amenity, it's like, sure, you can add all the amenities you want, but if you take iPhone pictures or you don't show those amenities in your first couple of shots on Airbnb or VRBO, like, nobody's going to see it, and therefore you won't make as much money, right? So market the amenities that's number one. Number two is look at your guest avatar and what they like, and then nail that. I posted a really good, I even did a podcast episode on this and interviewed this person. This chick bought a basic cabin in Blue Ridge, Georgia, one of the most saturated markets in the country. And it's basic. I mean, like, it's from like the 80s and it's like blah. But she is a 2-bedroom. She is literally in the 95th percentile for revenue performance.
Wow.
And when I met her at a conference, and I was like, oh, what market are you in? She's like, I'm in Blue Ridge. And I was like, oh, like, how's your property doing? And she's like, oh, it's actually doing really well. And I'm like, what's your secret formula? And so the title of her property is Pet Friendliest a Cabin in Blue Ridge. And all of her amenities are all pet friendly amenities. And they're
Amazing.
unique. Like, she's got like, I mean, everything you can imagine. She even has like crates and like washing supplies and brushes. And all of her couches have like a pet cover you can put on. She even has like a little hose thing that you can want, like a shower in the backyard that you can wash your dog off with, like the bags. And they have this really cool, like, these little stones that the kids can draw on that says like, she calls them paw prints or something like that. And anyway, it's like all this like really, really unique stuff for the actual pets. And anyway, so she does really, and it attracts pet friendly people, and she does the best in her market for 2 bedrooms.
Amazing.
And it's not a brand new cabin there. So,
So just being thoughtful, like, on your guest avatar, and like, make sure
yes,
you market it
that and
appropriately.
lighting. That's, if you want a straight up answer, lighting. There you
Lighting.
go. Lighting,
So
blue
what do
lighting,
you?
like theater
So
room blue lighting or outdoor lighting.
okay, let's give some alpha to the audience here. So is that like upgrade your lighting, right? Outdoor lights. Do you like recommend a hot tub basically every single like your market
String lights. Yeah,
string lights?
string lights, just add string lights. That's huge. Like I said, marketing, like taking the photos of that. But if you have a theater room or a game room and you do that, I've seen this work all the time, like kind of like the trim, like lighting around the top. That's really eye catching. These are scroll stopping things. Lighting is really, really big. And it's probably the number one like return on investment amenity is just lighting. I know it sounds silly, but it's so true. And I have tons of examples to show it. So
I literally wrote it down and put a check mark on it. I'm gonna literally tell my wife Liz, who's designing that new property, that like that's something we should incorporate. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. Now, flip side, what are some of the lower ROI amenities that people put in there that like generally don't give you a decent return on your capital?
so it depends on the market, but things like really like they're kind of like ones that are like super unique for a type of person that actually isn't coming to that property. For example, EV chargers, I've seen them go either way. Like
Huh.
they could be
Huh.
really beneficial, but then not. So like some of my properties, people in Teslas aren't driving to my properties. They just aren't, and that's okay. Like I'm not like, oh, but like other properties, they are. So guess which ones have the EV chargers and which ones don't. If I added it, it wouldn't make me any money. Game consoles, that's another one too. Like Xboxes and PlayStations and stuff. Like people have to bring their own games. What if they don't play that console? Like it's nice, but it's a game changer and it's going to make you money. Another one too. Let's see.
Those are just a nightmare too, by the way. We stay away from that. Things get lost, get
Yeah,
broken, people get mad.
the broken. Yeah,
Oh, hey, actually, I have a question for you. Like pool tables, actually, pool tables. I actually just had this debate last night. Like, what's your? And I know it's market dependent, of course, but generally, like pool tables, good, bad, meh.
yeah. It's a tricky one because it depends on the market. But mountain markets, yes, must have. Beach markets, no, waste of
No.
space. That's how I look at it.
Okay.
So the more like, I don't know, the more activity driven the property needs to have, pool tables do decent. The more like external amenity driven, so like lakes and beaches and maybe theme park markets and things like that, they do not need pool tables at all.
Got it.
So it just kind of
Okay.
depends. The Catskills, that's an interesting one. I would probably say if you have space, I would consider it. If not, then a foosball table's fine. So
Put something else on. Okay. There's just one broader question I want to ask you about. You operate a data platform. The biggest question people have is like, how do I trust the data integrity of a platform, right? Like, and obviously a lot of it's kind of word of mouth. Like, hey, I used it, great. Like, then you're like, okay, hey, Kenny used it. I like Kenny. He's smart. He's successful. I'm going to use what Kenny did, right? That obviously is good, but kind of a good, okay answer. I don't think it's the best answer. As the founder of a data company, like how do you think about that, and how do we as consumers, how do we have confidence that like the numbers we're getting are not right, but like are collected properly or presented properly?
correct. Yeah, no, I gotcha. So the biggest thing I tell people is that you should never rely on one, two, or three data points. So when I'm looking at evaluating a property, I don't like to just pull a few comparable properties and go, great, that's the revenue. First off, I like to run a range of revenue. So I'll say, oh, a property can generate between 70 and 90,000 or 180 and 200,000 like that. But I like to look at the market data as a whole. So I have a heavy like stats background, and we want, as when we're analyzing and doing data science projects, we want as many data points as we can. And what you will see in most markets is groupings and tiers. I call it tiers, but they're essentially groupings or clusters of data of revenue for every single property, meaning that you have a certain cluster that's here and they might be waterfront properties, and you have your non-waterfront properties are here, and then you have properties that are like look like grandma's closet down here. And the data, without even knowing those things, the data tells you and shows you the clusters. And then all you have to do is just like use your like click in the link, look at the pictures and go, oh, I see why this property is there. And then put two and two together and it becomes black and white. But now you're looking at a whole market data set. So when we're looking at data, and there's always going to be anomalies in it, doesn't matter the data provider. Okay. I can't say like, oh, we're 5% more accurate than AirDNA because I have no way of knowing and they don't either. So you're never going to get like a technical answer. So what I tell people is that you need to look at as many data points as you can and do something what we call smoothing, meaning we're looking at all these data points. We're not using the anomalies to say this is what we're going to do or determine, occupancy or ADR or whatever that is. We're using collective group clusterings in ranges to dictate what we're going to do. That removes a lot of error in any type of data set. It makes it a lot more, I guess like less risky from that sense.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that's I'm learning stuff too. No, I mean, look, I mean, we do. I don't have a stats background. I've just been looking at this stuff long enough. But no, that's great advice. And if you, I hope you've listened this far, folks that are listening to this episode. Like, I mean, what Kenny's saying is gold. So really, it just saves you so much heartache on the back end. Like just doing the work. Use STR Insights. Use whatever providers. Use multiple providers. Right. If you have one that you like, definitely double check your work. And it's not. Candidly, it's not that expensive. Like if it's a small investment to avoid a big mistake. So we have 3 different providers. Like definitely get as much data as you can, and really let the data kind of tell you versus like you forcing. You can always force the data to do unnatural acts. Like you can always, if you squeeze it long enough, like it'll tell you what you want it to say. But like that's ultimately not kind of like what you're trying to go for. Like you're not trying to have an accomplice to a decision. Like you want it to actually drive that decision making for you. And sometimes like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like we spent 22 months. Like we looked at a lot of properties and like didn't want to force it to work, right? We wanted something that actually is going to actually make money for us. Because ultimately that's the goal here. It's not just to buy properties, it's to make money, right? But hey, Kenny, thank you so much I know we went way over. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate your candor. You shared a ton of insights for us here. I know people are going to be interested in learning more. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah. Number one, you can reach out to me via social media, just at Kenny_Bedwell on Instagram. You can follow me on Facebook. I've got a Facebook group. It's called the STR Data Host. So join that. You can reach out on there. Just read random stuff I post about data and the STR world. So those are the 2 best places.
All right. So hit up Kenny on Instagram and definitely check out strinsights.com. And it's
Yeah, that one
it's a
too.
great resource.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well,
You
hey,
go to
Kenny.
our website as well, yeah. But if they want to contact me, then yeah, it's social media. So, yeah.
Awesome. Hey, look, great. I'm glad we got to meet in Nashville a few months back. Look forward to next time we get to see you in person, and hopefully, this property works out, and we can get some more. And I love having these conversations. Like I'm better for it, and I want to thank you again for spending time with me today and sharing your knowledge with the audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Michael. I appreciate it.